I'm in the big leagues, told her don't miss me. Ballin' like Houston, ayy, feeling like Whitney. I need a bag, bruh, send it through quickly. I'm making his dog, like I'm in the big leagues. Told him that I gotta go, dog.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Said Connects, Cannabis Entrepreneurial Dialogues. This is your host, Danny. Our mission is to create spaces for people of color, brands of color, minorities in the cannabis industry to educate and empower our communities through storytelling, experiences, and most importantly, through representation. If you haven't hit that subscribe button on YouTube, make sure to do so at Said Connects, CED Connects, and follow us on Instagram at CED_Connects for all the updates of these episodes here in season 3. As you guys seen throughout this season now, we've been going to different locations and different spots. Today is no different. We are at Telos here in downtown LA, where Bico is manufactured out of as well. And we have the founder and owner alongside with me, Timeka Drew. And we're going to really tap into that. But first, I want to just shout them out. Thank them for allowing us to be in the space and allowing us to record from here for on site. And so, Timeka, thank you for being here, for allowing us to come through.
So happy to have you, and thank you so much for having us. We are such huge fans of what you are doing.
Nice.
For the space.
I like hearing that sometimes, because it's sometimes like, you know, between Steven and I doing the work, I'm like, is anyone ever watching this stuff?
It's important. And then you have all I love how you have the dialogue and you really cut it up and make it so that we can really share it with people as well, because that's a big part. You know, our voices are definitely underrepresented and actually getting to say things that matter, having conversations. You know, you have the marketing stuff, but getting to know people and really what drives them and what they're passionate about is something that you've really been sharing, and also what people have learned. I've been hip to a lot of game watching CED Connect. So
nice. Thank you. But as always, in every episode, we love to learn a little more about you, your upbringing, what was the messaging behind cannabis in your life and your household growing up, and the transition as to where you're at now. So if you could share a little bit about that, you know. Sure.
Well, I am originally from Fort Wayne, Indiana. And Indiana is definitely, people used to joke in the beginning of when we started talking about national legalization that Indiana would be one of the last states to go rec. And although it's full of a lot of really fantastic farmers, there's definitely a huge stigma around the cannabis plant in the Midwest, but specifically Indiana. But my parents definitely were cannabis smokers. I didn't really know it per se. It wasn't like they ever smoked around us, but their politics around the plant were definitely, you know, they made us aware of those politics. And that was really that, you know, cannabis was helpful for a lot of people, and it shouldn't be something people should be getting put in jail for, and something that was likely going to be legal sometime in my lifetime. So I definitely very early on kind of understood that the plant was something that, you know, was bending and changing at some point perhaps. But I didn't really think about it too much more until I got to be an adult and I actually needed it, as a medical cannabis patient. Okay.
So you, Fort Wayne, Indiana, when was the transition from Fort Wayne over to the West Coast? What happened in between all of that?
So I was in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I decided I got to get out of here. So as soon as I graduated from high school, I went to college in DC. I was going to the Catholic University of America. Okay. So I went to all Catholic schools. So that's kind of a very specific thing as well for me in my life. And it was at Catholic University that I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. So I was really healthy. I was this track star. Hadn't really had very many health problems. And then all of a sudden, after that first year of college, I just got really, really sick. And that really started my journey on what would lead me to cannabis, which was just really terrible, constant pain and suffering due to Crohn's disease. And I did everything that my doctors told me. I was getting sicker and sicker, decided I needed to move back home. So I actually graduated from Indiana University, Bloomington, moved back to Indiana, but then came out to the West Coast doing an AmeriCorps program. So I was living actually in Northern California doing AmeriCorps, and that's when I really found out that cannabis was legal for medical patients. I had a plug at the time, and we kind of went back and forth with funny stories. And one time he had a story about how he almost got pulled over with my bag in his car. And for me, from Indiana, that's a huge thing. It's like, oh my God, you almost just went to jail, for a long time, potentially. And he was just like, no, it wouldn't have even been a big deal. Like, I actually probably would have gotten a ticket, and you, with how sick you are, you can go get medical cannabis down the street from the compassionate caregivers in Oakland. And at first I thought he was joking, and I didn't think it was that funny of a joke for a sick girl. Like, don't joke with me about my cannabis. Like, what are you doing? But then I found out he wasn't lying. He was telling me the truth. I got my doctor's recommendation there and started buying legal cannabis in California, which was, just being able to have such a variety of products at the time really helped me learn how to be able to medicate and get to a place where, I could actually survive and thrive eventually.
Were you taking, I'm going to assume you were taking other like pharmaceutical meds prior to leading up to cannabis? That's right. And what were the side effects, or what was it that caused you to find an alternative?
Well, there were so many things. One thing is that most people with digestive disorders when they have flare-ups, they're put on a lot of steroids. So I was on the same amount of prednisone. I had a boyfriend at the time whose dad had brain cancer, and he and I were on the exact same amount of prednisone. So I was having incredible amount of weight gain, depression, bloating, just from the steroids. And that's before we get into any of the pain medication, the maintenance medications, which are things that are kind of you're always taking them. So they build up, and you have a lot of toxins that build up in your system. And then you have headaches, and you have trouble sleeping, and you have anxiety and different things that the medications are causing. So then they're giving you drugs to make you feel better, to help you get to sleep, to help you with depression. And so soon, I had this a massive box of drugs that I was being prescribed, all of which were making me sicker and sicker. And I was getting worse with the Crohn's disease, besides adding all these side effects onto my experience. So there was one time, I'm in Northern California. I was working for AmeriCorps. I had to medically withdraw because I was so sick. I had gone from being somebody who was in a lot of pain and was like on the toilet a lot to someone who was now like throwing up all the time. And we're talking always blood, both ends blood. So these are the things that people that have, and when I look back and I think about my just everyday life, I can't even imagine living that life anymore. And I didn't think that I was ever going to be able to be outside of that experience. And I was being told by every doctor that I wasn't. Like, this is a lifelong disease. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. We're going to have to take parts of your intestines out, and you're going to have a colostomy bag. I mean, all of those things were my absolute reality at that time. So I went into the hospital once after I had lost my job. And they told me, they were like, Timeka, you've lost a lot of weight. At that time, I think I was something like 106 pounds. And I'm not like a big woman in general, but you can only go down so far when you're 5'9". And they said, the next time you come in, we're going to put you on a feeding tube because you're wasting, And I decided right then and there, well, I've got to change my life. I've got to change something, because if I come in and I'm put on a feeding tube, I'm not going to have the will to live anymore. I'm going to start to give up. And that's really when I decided to turn to cannabis. And for me, it was, and I think a lot of people don't realize this, at the time, it was a very expensive decision to make. I took credit cards because we were actually allowed to use credit cards, right? It was like the first time. And I was taking out credit cards to be able to buy the quality of medicine that I needed to be able to get better. And then once I moved to LA, I was actually able to get a job at a dispensary, and they were able to gift me the medicine that I could utilize to help get better. So, but without those programs for really chronically ill people, you can never get better. Even if you could get better, you still have to have the medicine to be able to get to that point, and it's expensive. And so, the medical programs that are happening now, the donation programs, they're so incredibly important. And so I really just appreciate all brands and individuals who are helping in that regard.
Absolutely. And I guess for those like that have never been a medical patient and maybe have just, partaken on the plant itself, just for recreational purpose or whatever. Like, I don't think it ever even crosses their mind the challenges that come with that. So thank you for sharing that, and and really kind of breaking it down as to that, because for me, I had never, personally too, I never really considered like the hoops and hurdles that come with like having to go through that.
Well, and it's embarrassing, and you have, when you're sick too, you don't always want to just be asking for help. And so it's like you're kind of constantly running around. You need things, you need access to things, you don't have money. And there really needs to be places where you don't have to ask. You can just go and know, you can sign up. There's a process so that, you don't have to feel like it's your fault that you can't afford or have access to the medicine that you need to survive. Because in this country, everybody should have what they need to survive, which is why home grow is so important, which is why, having greater access to this plant in all ways is incredibly important.
Yeah. And so you're down in LA, you have access to more flower now. You're working in a dispensary. Have you always worked in the cannabis industry? Were you working in other industries prior to? Were you doing both? What was that like?
So I was working in cannabis for a little while after I kind of dropped out of law school. I came to LA going to USC Law School. I had to withdraw from law school because I was so sick. And that was my rock bottom, because I had worked my whole life to be a lawyer. Yeah. And all of a sudden I was just too sick to be able to, achieve that goal at that time. And I started working at the Compassionate Caregivers, the Yellow House in West Hollywood, and opened a doctor-patient referral service with them. And in that, just really learned a lot about the industry and where it could go eventually. It was still very early. This is early 2000s.
Yeah.
And in between then and now, I worked in the nonprofit industry. I did quite a few hustles for money as well. Did some modeling, did some acting, did some things, but mostly spent my time working in the grassroots democracy movement with an organization called the Liberty Tree Foundation. I was their executive director for a while. And when they first brought me on, I was really working as a climate activist. Climate. So talking about, global warming, climate change, but specifically thinking about all of the ways that climate change is connected to so many of the other movements that we've been working for, like prison abolition and, the peace movement, the anti-war movement, working against the prison industrial complex, working against the military industrial complex. All of those things are actually working for climate as well. And it's about understanding and connecting the dots between, all of these movements so that we can create a much bigger movement. And I see cannabis as a part of this movement as well, which is why I feel, uniquely passionate. I think about this plant that saved my life, and also this movement of people that are demanding that, our industries, our businesses are doing better and doing more. And so that when we create regulations, we're taking into account people that had been harmed by, the product that we're regulating. That's a unique and revolutionary concept, something that I feel if we continue to do it right, it doesn't have to be something that just stays within cannabis. That could be something that we're looking at in all industries, because human beings are affected by every industry on the planet. And we should be looking at how the greater good, can be served by the way that we're setting up these industries.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just knowing like the type of work that you're doing now, which we'll tap into, everything leading up to it makes so much more sense now with how you touched on, you're as passionate as you are about the plant and the work that you do, even with the nonprofit, like that in itself. I used to work for a nonprofit. I ran a nonprofit as well. I obviously preparing for this interview, I was like, I saw, a few videos that you had up there at working, speaking at universities. And at the time I was like, that was one of my goals when I was working as a nonprofit organizer. I was like, one day I'm gonna be a keynote speaker somewhere. Like that was that, and I still want to. So for those nonprofits out there, I still want to be a keynote one day, or even like be on a TED Talk one day. I was like that's one of my goals one day, because I used to operate for a male engagement program. I created a male engagement program. I used to work for a Head Start agency, working with the babies and
Beautiful.
working with families, and specifically work with men and their children, and find ways to get more men to be involved with their children. And so there was a lot of speaking engagement opportunities to do so. So when I saw that from you, I was like, oh shit, that's dope. I was like, we got to talk about that at least a little bit, because that was something that I was like really passionate about. Like, I want to get in there one day and talk about something.
Well, I appreciate that. And one of the things that I really would love to see in cannabis, because I know that, people that are really passionate and have great hearts in cannabis, and everybody wants to put money, but they want to put it into cannabis nonprofits. And my whole point is always, look, there have been people on the ground that have been addressing the systemic harms that the war on drugs have created. They've been doing it for decades, and they are incredibly underfunded. And if cannabis could just understand that, like, these housing rights folks over here, these prison abolition folks over there, these folks who are working for green spaces and to make sure that our kids have fresh food and organic food and the right to learn how to grow that food in farms, all of those folks are doing work that we should be funding through the cannabis movement, the cannabis industry. We shouldn't be just setting up cannabis nonprofits to serve cannabis brands. I mean, it's great. I'm not saying it's not needed, but it's definitely not the only thing that the multi-billion-dollar cannabis industry could be supporting and funding. I think we have a responsibility to do better and to do more. And we could really be showing, a real example of how this can all work.
Yeah, for sure. You're absolutely right there. So you're working, you're the bud tender, you're going through the process, you're learning a lot on the job with maybe coming into contact with other medical patients. Was that the genesis of the brand? Or how did that, all of the work leading up to that transition to starting of the brand and leading up to like the position that you're at outside of just a brand? Because it's not just a brand that you have, right? Like you're also,
That's right.
You mentioned your compliance. You're into compliance. You're into understanding the ins and outs of operations. How do we get from the bud tender in LA to where we're at now?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And I appreciate the question about the brand, because I think a lot of people make their brand stories really simple. And I don't think they usually are. I mean, I think the way that we usually come to building things that we love and that we're passionate about, it's not a simple process. It's usually complex. Sure. And for me, I did go from being that bud tender to then, opening the doctor-patient referral service, where I was dealing really closely with doctors and really teaching them about the regulations as well. Or at the time, it was really just that really small Prop 215 and the rights that we had and how they could help patients really be able to take advantage of those rights. And then, once legalization hit, understanding that people that look like me were not going to be incredibly involved, and that the smartest way I thought for me to be able to get in where I could fit in was to really start learning the regulations and to be an expert early on about how this all works. Sure. I had my legal background, I had the ability to read and understand, and looking at the licensing process, and then understood that I was actually eligible for a social equity license, and put together a strategy and a plan to bring these licenses into fruition, these Telos licenses with my partners there. And, from that learning, and I think anybody that's really hungry and that wants to learn can definitely get into this industry knowing very little, learn on the job, on the ground, sure. Reading, education, and really move up. And I feel like that's really what I've done. As long as you stay open to learning, and you're constantly learning. I'm constantly studying, in all new states. And, being a licensee, having my manufacturing license, I was a partner on a cultivation license for a time as well. I'm now this phase 3 round 1 retail licensee.
Now, when you say phase 3 round 1, like, what does that all mean? Because I hear it. I'm sure a lot of folks hear phase 1, phase 2. Like, what does that actually really mean?
So let's do this is a good time that we can do a little Los Angeles social equity licensing breakdown.
Gotcha.
Because I am your girl for that and all questions around that. So in Los Angeles so far, we've had 3 phases of licensure. We had phase 1, which were our, previously licensed medical dispensaries. These were the OGs that were already open. Okay. Then we had phase 2. Phase 2 were social equity qualified individuals who could prove that they were connected to a compliantly operating medical business. So at the time, if you had, just a compassionate care collective that you were running properly, that you had your paperwork for, at the time, Jake and I and one of our partners at Telos, we were running a delivery service that served the desert community, and we actually had a license to do that early on. So that was one of the ways that we could prove we were doing compliant work in that time. So that was phase 2. So that was distribution, manufacturing, which is type 6 here, licenses that were available, and cultivation licenses that were available through that phase 2. Okay. And then now, obviously, the type 6 manufacturing and the distro licenses are available to anybody in the general public. So they were phase 2 social equity only then, but then they became open to everyone in October of 2021. So those are available to anybody right now. If you want to get a manufacturing license, a distro license in LA, you can go into the portal and you can apply right now. You do not need to be a social equity verified individual. And so those are the only licenses in LA that you can apply for, that you do not need to be a social equity verified individual. And also, I think a lab testing. If you want to open a lab, you can do that too.
As well. Okay.
And then we moved into the retail round, which was our phase 3. So we had 2 rounds of phase 3. We've had phase 3 round 1, which everybody kind of knows as, the big scandalous round where we had, everybody was holding properties. There was pushback. There was the audit. There was the lawsuit. More licenses were given. I was actually like number 230 something on that list, and there were 200 licenses that ended up being given out. So I was at the very bottom of the list. I slid through, and now we had phase 3 round 2, which were all the folks that were newly verified through LA's social equity program.
And that just recently happened.
That just recently happened. So there was a new verification round. You had to go in, you had to apply again to get verified. Even people who had been previously verified had to get re-verified again if they wanted to get eligibility. And then they could apply for phase 3 round 2, which was the most recent retail lottery, which pulled, I believe, 125 winners. And those are listed right now on the DCR website. Anybody that was verified, though, through that new social equity verification round are eligible to apply for the current licenses that are available, which are the delivery license as well as the nursery license in LA. So even if you didn't win through phase 3 round 2, you can still apply for a couple of those licenses that are only available for social equity applicants in the city of LA.
And again, that would be delivery and nursery.
Delivery and nursery.
Now, let's say I'm a social equity applicant, and I wanted to move forward with the delivery license. What steps would I need to take then to go forward with that plan?
Good question. So the first step would be to find a compliant property. And for delivery licenses in the city of LA, that means that you need to be only 600 feet from a school and no other sensitive uses apply to you. So, and you don't have undue concentration to worry about either. So you could actually be right next door to your favorite dispensary as long as it's 600 feet away from a school, which by definition it will be. That's going to be a compliant location for you.
For delivery. Now, if you were one of those individuals that won the lottery most recently,
congratulations.
And one of them I know was Tiana from
That's right, Queen Mary. That's right.
So shout out to you, Tiana.
Yes.
We've had her on the episode as well. So what what challenges are to come now for those applicants that have received the storefront?
So let's go back and talk about phase 3 round 1 applicants before we talk about the phase 3 round 2, because we've got a lot of phase 3 1 applicants, including phase 3 round 1 applicants, including myself, who still need to lock down a location. Now, an interesting thing has kind of happened recently for those applicants. Any phase 3 round 1 applicants in the city of LA who had their license application abandoned because they lost their property, maybe they changed their partnership, their license went into the abandoned phase. They have 1 year from that date that it was abandoned to apply again. And the Plum Committee and the City Council just decided that those particular individuals are going to be allowed to be located anywhere in the city that is not within undue concentration. So currently those applicants, those phase 3 round 1 applicants, have to be located in the same community plan area that they originally applied in. So it makes it so that, like, for example, I'm in the Southeast Los Angeles community plan area. It's over there by USC, over there by South Central. There are only so many compliant properties in any community plan area to begin with. Now, of those compliant properties, you can't make any landowner or management company work with you, right? So you might have compliant properties that would be perfect and beautiful, but they don't want to deal with cannabis businesses. So right there, you've got some that are knocked off the board. And then even of those ones that might work, if there are any, and there are community plan areas which might have a couple spaces available as far as numbers of retail locations that could be located there, but they might not actually have those locations available in the community plan area, right? So they say 5 slots left, but there aren't 5 locations left to even be a part of. And if there's that one location that you can find, that needle in a haystack, you better believe that that landlord knows they are that needle in a haystack, and that security deposit might go from, hey, it sounds pretty reasonable to begin with at $10,000 a month, and it might get, or $10,000 for your security deposit, and it might get hiked up to $100,000 by the time you're done with your negotiations. And we've seen that happen in the city of LA.
And there's no opportunities to move into another area? Like, is there conversations or, fight to be able to move out of those originating areas? So
yes. So now there is a process that is coming together. The Plum Committee suggested it. The City Council approved it. And now DCR is working on an actual process to make this happen. That's to say, like, if you are one of these abandoned phase 3 round 1 licensees, applicants, here's what you do to be able to move out of your location, or at least like the system is now ready to allow for you to enter in a location that is not within your original community plan area, right? So they're working on that process now. We're really hoping, we're hearing whispers that hopefully it'll be done by the end of the month, maybe by the beginning of February at the latest. And then all the phase 3 round 1 folks and the phase 3 round 2 folks will be looking all over the city of LA for the compliant properties. And by compliant property, I mean any property that is located within 700 feet of a sensitive use in the city of Los Angeles, which are parks, schools, daycare centers, youth centers, drug rehabilitation facilities.
That's a
what's
lot.
Another one? The homes. There's a couple like homes where you're. It's like you're gonna have to edit this part out. It's like
the halfway home?
Yeah, like when you're exactly like a drug rehabilitation center where you live there, but there's a lot of different little things, so you have to go look at the zoning, look at the sensitive use requirements.
Is there
and make
a website to like pinpoint these? Because just again, working in like the early education and I used to work for like a childcare agency location, like they have not only center-based programs, but they have the home-based programs. Like, do you also have to be cognizant about the home-based program?
Any program that is registered is going to be something that you have to worry about. So a lot of times what will happen, Danny, is like you'll look at a property. you might do the best searches you can do yourself. You know, you'll go on Google, you're searching daycare, you're searching youth center, you're searching drug rehab, you're searching anything that is somewhat anywhere near the sensitive use, all the parks, and it might look good. And then you'll send it to a radius map vendor, which I always suggest people use before they apply, because then the radius map vendor, they have that city tract map, which is different than everybody else's map. They have all the licensed and registered daycares and all the lists.
Yeah.
So they might tell you, okay, there's this office building over here that just looks like an office building to you, but inside of it is a registered Head Start, you know, or inside of it is a registered preschool program or whatever it is. And so you really need to, you can kind of utilize your own skills to see what might be in play, but from that list, you need to make sure a professional is telling you and verifying to make sure, so that you're not spinning your wheels and getting landowners to do things for you that you don't need them to do. So you had asked me a question about if you want to apply for one of these things, what would you do? And that first question is, you find that location and you have to apply for something called a pre-application in LA. So basically you're just putting in really simple information about the entity that will hold the license, one form that has been notarized by the landlord that says it's okay for this location to be used for cannabis. And then they'll check to make sure that it's okay for sensitive use, it's okay for undue concentration. And then once DCR gives that thumbs up through the portal, you will be eligible to apply for temporary approval. And you will have 1 year from kind of when they tell you that you can go ahead and apply for temporary approval to apply, get everything in, and get approved.
And that's before, and during that time during that first year, that's when you're building out, that's when are you essentially now responsible for paying the landlord?
That's right. So typically what you're going to do is you're going to try to get into a relationship where you can get that pre-application done and verified without paying that landlord anything. It's kind of like, we'd like to do this. Here's the terms we'd like to settle on if we can find out this is compliant. But then after you get that pre-application approval, you will need a lease and them to sign some more documents when you move forward with temporary approval. Yeah. So that is when you will likely have to start paying them something. Sure. Now, if you have a landlord who knows a little bit about cannabis, or you have a savvy lawyer or a partner, or even yourself, if you feel good at negotiating and you're the equity partner, try to get it so that you're not paying too much before you're able to open or before you actually get the license. You might have to pay a little bit just to hold the location because it's a valuable location. Other people might want to apply in, but make sure that you're not paying the actual lease rate until you're doing the actual activity that lease rate reflects. Yeah. So pay a normalized lease rate at first when you're doing your build outs and you're, having your inspections and all of that, and then start paying the actual lease once you get the state license and your temporary approval from the city so that you can actually operate.
Nice. Now, how beneficial would it be to, so you have the location, you have everything in place, everything is signed through, you're in County of LA. How beneficial would it be for you as an operator, owner, to now maybe start hitting up the neighborhood council meetings and just making your presence known in those communities? Because I remember, again, going back to the nonprofits, I was told, one of the advices that was given to me was, go to these meetings and don't just show up the first time. Like, make yourself known there. Like, let the community know that your intent is honest and true by being present every time instead of just showing up.
Absolutely.
How would that work out?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that everybody always harps about going to city council meetings. And I think to your point, it's important to go to your local meetings. So your neighborhood council meetings are really important. It's also important to really connect with the folks who have been doing work in that community, whether it's folks who have actually been serving a houseless community, perhaps in an area where, because, a lot of these green zones are our, least taken care of areas and spaces in the city, and our unhoused communities and, other people are not considered, so we have to be the ones to make sure that we're showing what community looks like. So we're partnering with nonprofits and other groups that have been working in that community. We're having one-on-one meetings with them and asking them, as a new neighbor, as a new business that wants to do good here, what can I do to help serve you and support your goals, rather than coming in and, thinking we're just going to establish new things. And no, how can we support what's already happening? Right. Let's find out from the people in this unique, specific neighborhood what they need and how we can help. And there's a lot of ways that cannabis businesses and facilities can help local neighborhoods,
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure it sounds like that's like a unique approach that I don't think, I may be wrong, but I don't know if there's been many, businesses, or at least cannabis businesses, that's been taking that approach. Am I wrong?
Well, I think it's really, we're in an interesting moment, especially around, we found out a lot when people started advocating for social equity businesses to move out of their original community plan areas. We started to hear certain community plans and people within certain community plans that didn't want social equity applicants moving from their particular community plan areas into there. So maybe, for example, just throwing one out there, they might not want somebody like me moving from my South Los Angeles community plan area over to their Silver Lake community plan area, right? Or something like that. So I just think that the destigmatization and like showing the good work that can be done is really going to be one of the only ways that we can disarm those folks who are already working against us, who are saying we don't want you here. I just think that we have to really be the ones who are innovating and being creative, because it's not like, especially I see a lot of the smaller brands that don't even have that much money. They're oftentimes the ones that are doing great community work. And that's coming from actual connection to people and wanting to work together with them, rather than just kind of like looking for things to throw money at, right? And I think the cannabis brands that do have a lot of money to throw places, I don't think they're throwing it in the right places, as I was kind of complaining about earlier. I think they're throwing it in places that are going to amplify them as a cannabis brand, but not places where the work needs to be supported,
So where do you fit in all of this? Like, are you in the process of moving out of your community planning, or have you found the location in that original space? What does that look like? Yeah,
I am currently, I've been in all places through this process, this very painful multi-year process. But right now, the space I am in right this moment is I am looking at locations all over the city, looking towards utilizing that ability to move out of my community plan area, because my community plan area is saturated and there really are not compliant locations there anymore. Right. So I am hopeful and looking forward to that opening up, but I also feel that it's going to be really slim pickings, considering we've got phase 3 round 2 folks out there too looking for locations now. And I feel with this moment as well, with the greed that we know is there, a lot of people are hoping what happens in this moment is that so many of us are not able to operationalize, and it just wipes those licenses into general population licenses. So, we have 325 licenses set aside for the first retail licenses outside of the medical ones, in LA. And if we can only get, 75 of the 50 to 75 of those operational, whose fault is it going to be? It's going to be the fault of those, non-experienced social equity operators that are just not savvy enough to be the ones entering the market. It's this whole propagandized, thing that's kind of being built around this social equity program. And you're seeing it in general. It's this, the fact that this isn't rolling out well is the fault of social equity, and it's ruining the industry. You know, if I had $1 for every time I heard a random, white male executive across the country utter those words, I would be able to buy us all a really schwanky dinner tonight. But it's I know, right? If they would just get, every time I hear it now, I should be like, just give me $1. Like, you owe me $1 now. Because I do hear it quite regularly. Social equity is ruining the industry. Rather than realizing that we shouldn't even be allowed to have an industry unless we can figure out social equity and how to empty the jails of the people who are still in it for cannabis, which is something we still haven't figured out, right? We're still not talking about the real things. We're still just we're using words, and we're, talking about money and businesses, but we're not talking about people that were enslaved over having a joint in the wrong place at the wrong time, and the fact that that's still happening, even in states that are legal and where adult use is supposedly fine, and all the cities in the state where, we couldn't go smoke a joint safely in that city where it's supposedly legal in California to smoke, you and I would be targeted right away, and it would be dangerous for us to go to a lot of places and smoke. And I think we need to be talking about that more as well, and about how are we going to set up safe spaces for us to be able to consume outside of needing to go get a license for it. Every single thing can't be licensed activity either in an adult use state. So we got to figure out the ways that we're protecting ourselves, protecting our businesses, speaking about the reality of social equity, and why we're even talking about that, and why we have to talk about it, why it's something that the industry has to reckon with. It's not it's not an if, it's a when and a how. And, that's going to be the only way that we're going to be able to move forward in a real way into federal legalization without having some real uproar.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And what are some, what's one solution to that you can maybe propose?
A solution to
these issues with, so all these things that everyone says is an issue with social equity.
Well, it's it's just so multifaceted. For me, it's got to stop being that we're looking to other people and programs to solve the problem. So it's I feel companies and retailers are often looking at the regulators and saying, hey, these social equity programs, we'll do what you tell us to do. And if you don't tell us to do the right things, well, the social equity community suffers. No, we know so many different things that we can do to be supporting underrepresented brands in this space. And so it's retailers' responsibility to be, figuring out those programs for themselves. It's consumers' responsibilities to walk into these shops and be saying, hey, do you have Black and brown and queer-owned brands on the shelves? And if you don't, why? Here's a couple that I know of. It's the responsibility of, brands as well to be working with each other and amplifying each other's messages and lifting each other up, and not trying to pretend there's a competition between us, when in reality, if we don't band together, our real competitors are going to crush us. And those are some of the solves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so you touched on the brands, and I want to go back to the start of your brand. Talk to us about the start of that, the name. Where did the name come from, and what are some of the things that you guys have in place for those solutions? Because a lot of those solutions that you've just brought up now sounds like things that your brand is already moving in that direction, obviously, right, and naturally. So talk to us a little bit more about the brand, so that the listeners can go to these shops and say, why isn't Pico here?
That's right. We want to see more Pico.
Right.
So I really appreciate that question. I appreciate the space to talk a little bit about just, being a woman in the industry, because that's part of really why I wanted to create a brand initially, was just thinking back to medical days and going into, and at that time you're going into every dispensary as a medical patient. You're trying to see who has a medical support program, who's got the best deals, who can I rely on? So I'm going to all these different dispensaries, and so much of the branding and so much of just the way that the retail experience was set up was not for women. You know, it was very much for men, and it felt even hostile and triggering, you know, for women that have been through a lot of trauma in life. You know, there were a lot of like traumatic things to have to deal with in a medical dispensary sometimes, just to get your medicine. And so for me, I really wanted to be able to create a brand that, for one, had that consistency and quality that I rely on as a medical patient. So just to know that, you know, if you can walk into a store and at least know, okay, they have this brand, I can rely on this pre-roll right now. It's at least going to get me high because I know they don't ever use trim. I know they only use whole flower, and that, you know, I know their founder is a medical patient, and, you know, she feels that it's incredibly important to make sure that we understand what's going into our bodies as well, right? We can't, it's got to be the highest quality. It's got to be the full flower. You got to have a nice terpene profile full of oils, you know, just that dry trim, what they would call trash that oftentimes they're putting into pre-rolls now. It doesn't even get me high, you know, even if it does, even if it is infused, it's not going to get me to where I need to be as a over, you know, 2 decades smoker now.
Sure.
So for me, there was a part of it of wanting to create something that I wasn't seeing and wasn't able to feel in the medical industry. And then, you know, putting together this brand, once we had the legal industry, seeing the brands that were really popping, hearing people talk, I heard over and over a phrase that was, no one cares about buying weed from Black women. I heard that over and over and over to a point where I finally was like, well, I feel like I personally need to prove that that is a lie, because, you know, just because you're not seeing it happen doesn't mean it shouldn't be happening. And a lot of people's points was, look, we don't see Black women led and owned brands, which means like Black women are not the ones who understand this and can do this. You know, they need to be more in a supporting role. And I was told very early in my career, I needed to figure out what my supporting role was going to be. And so, you know, right away, you start to maneuver and figure out, and this is a nascent multi-billion-dollar industry. So it's not a mistake, you know, the people that they're trying to make sure they edge out and, you know, who they don't want to be influential. So any moment that, you know, we're being told, know your role in this brand new, we're building it as we're walking on the bridge to the promised land industry, you know that it's a system that has been playing this game from the very beginning, and we're not going to get wrapped up into the nonsense of it. So for me, hearing that a couple times, let me know I'm definitely going to launch a brand. And with that brand, I did, one of the things that I was hearing when people would give me advice on what the brand should be, you know, very clean, very sterile, very, you know, very Apple Store, very, you know, what are the middle-aged rich white guys looking for? That's what you're trying to, that's what you're trying to worry about. And for me, I really felt like cannabis consumers were just more, just really ready for more sophisticated than that, especially in California. By that time, you know, you've had an industry since 1996 that has been just popping off. And like, you're telling me cannabis consumers right now aren't willing to and don't want to see some texture and some vibrance and some difference between their brands? They absolutely do. Right. You know, so with Biko, I wanted to get away from that sterilization and get to a place where we could celebrate culture. And Biko means please in Igbo Nigerian. And for me, I'm a mixed girl from the Midwest who was in a totally homogenous white environment. And I wasn't even given the respect of being African or African American with those kids. Those kids, it was, you're from slaves. You know, it was like that. So I always had this real feeling of a lack of acceptance and a lack of like belonging, or even knowing where I might belong. And even finding out your, you know, where you come from doesn't even necessarily do that for you as an African American person, but it was a start for me to say, okay, I know that my people were from Nigeria. It's an actual place. I can learn about that culture. I can learn about the language, and I can celebrate that, you know, and I can teach my kids about it, which was something that I had never had before. And so we really wanted to do that with the brand. And it means, like I said, it means please. Yeah. And then our first product was our Juseo pre-roll, and Juseo means please, or please pass me in Korean.
Please pass me.
That's right. It's like specifically, which is perfect for a joint name.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we wanted to show also that coming together of cultures and community to make family, which is, this is a family owned and led brand. So we wanted to kind of reflect that in both of those ways. So we have Biko, which has our Juseo, with that kind of African Korean connection there, celebrating the family, and also just really, reminding people that this is a plant that helps bring us together and that, builds community and celebrates community.
And that says a lot to the branding, and with branding comes like the storytelling, right? And the followers, the brand, like anyone that enjoys a particular brand, it's important to know this story and have the background on it. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for making, putting a lot of thought into the brand, which obviously it shows. And I think I really enjoyed hearing how you're putting in your family into this, because you said it's a family-owned brand. So thank you for all of that. And what I really like about your branding too is how you said you don't like the sterilization part, and how you have the different colors for the different types of flower to allow the followers and who's picking up the product know exactly what they're getting. Was that something that was thought out from the jump? And what are some, as a brand, if you could share with us, what are some of the the bottlenecks that you've run into that you didn't anticipate at first when you started coming out with production runs and things of that nature?
Yeah, so you learn so much launching a brand. No matter how much you know, you just end up learning so much. And part of why we did our flower in series, we have our sun series, which is our outdoor. We have our red series, which is kind of what I say is our everyday flower. It's typically a light depth, but it's kind of something that is going to be high potency. You can smoke it all day. It's going to get you where you need to be. And then we have our black series flower, which is our highest end indoor flower. And for us, one of the things that I was seeing that a lot of brands were doing was, buying so much of one strain and then being known for that strain for a while, but having to really push through to keep it fresh. And so then it's like, I'm getting these, indica hybrid sativa. I've got to worry about these 3 strains at a time. And then I'm pushing them and then, trying to get as much of them as possible so that I'm creating the story around the strain. And very early on, it became clear to me that the way to offer our consumers the very best of the best product was going to be able to pick up small batches of really beautiful flower and just sell it through until it's gone, and then get some more, so instead of going and buying, 50 pounds or 100 pounds of something that's nice and being stressed out about selling it through, I'd rather buy 10 pounds of something really gorgeous and sell it through quickly.
Sure.
And just always be kind of hunting for really beautiful flower. And that's a way that we can then work with farms where, they might have some of their most beautiful selections from the whole year, but just in smaller quantities waiting. Or maybe somebody just picked up most of it, but 20 pounds still remains. Then Biko can actually be able to offer that for their consumers and offer it at a great price. Sometimes we're able to get a good deal because we're just picking up a little bit that's left over. And making sure that we are not being wasteful when we're thinking about this beautiful flower, this beautiful medicine as well, and just really celebrating and appreciating, what we have. And so those small batches, that ability to be here and stay really close to the production process as well has been something that's been incredibly important. Infused pre-rolls are not easy to make a good smokable pre-roll. Everybody, tons of brands have pre-rolls. I go and I buy everything and I test everything, and half those infused pre-rolls on the market, you can't even smoke it down halfway. So, and it's because it's great when you have robots doing things and you have machines and you're getting stuff done for pennies and oh my gosh, this is great for the margins. But like when I get a pre-roll pack of infused pre-rolls, there's a reason I'm doing that. It's because I'm, maybe I'm not feeling great. Maybe I'm sick and I know that I need a good, strong hit right now at that, and it needs to be fast acting and it needs to be, it's like I'm preparing for something. And so if that preparation fails because the product is faulty, and I don't care if I'd rather pay $5 more for a pack of infused pre-rolls that are going to smoke through well, that maybe had to be touched by human hands to make sure that happens, rather than, something I'm going to get $5 cheaper because it's run through the machine and it's full of the trim and everything else. We still have a process where human beings are there as a part of all the processes. And I do think that there is a place for that. I don't think that all cannabis manufacturing is going to move towards every single thing being done by robots only. I think that because of the nature of the product and the plant, I just think that sometimes, especially for a luxury good, you need to have that soft touch and that, that closeness to the product.
So you guys got the nut box and
that's right.
Got it all going on there.
That's right. That's right. And you got to make sure too that you're looking at things and that you're testing them and that you're making sure, you're doing small little batches and you're testing to make sure. To get our Juiceo Diamond SKU perfect, it really took a long time, not just to figure out the amount of THCA to get into that pre-roll, but the method of making sure that it was dispersed properly and that it wasn't going to taste harsh and that it was going to give you the same experience every time, because that's important.
Yeah, that is. And, and I have some of that experience working with Lowell in the past, and they were a big pre-roll company, and I was also part of like the manufacturing side of things. So, that was one of the things that, all the different touch points and all the different QC points that needs to be put in place that, a lot of people don't think about or even consider when they're thinking of the production runs and not only that part, but then the
packaging is a nightmare.
The making sure
that's really the biggest nightmare is the packaging.
The inventory of packaging.
All of it.
Being on top of that, because you can buy all the flour you want, and then you figure out, shit, I only have enough to make 300 pre-rolls. Like,
that's right.
Now you have that bottleneck of like, how do I move forward?
Well, and I think inventory health is a real challenge, especially for new brands, because you think, you make all this inventory and then people, they push so hard to sell it and they don't realize then they sell all their inventory and then like, great, we sold all this inventory, but those reorders are coming. And if you don't have them ready, it only takes one time that they try to reorder and you're not there, that now it's like a new account again. You got to go reopen that account. Right. They've been trying to reorder and they can't. So, keeping that inventory health, kind of trying to grow slowly but surely your SKUs so that you have more to offer, which is one thing that we are doing. We're working on several new offerings, which will be great to have out in the market. For myself personally, I'm ready for the Bico pre-roll pack because I need it in my life personally. Really it's just trying to really figure out how to grow your brand without needing to spend a ton of money, out the gate. And I think that, especially for underrepresented smaller brands, I think I am here to be able to say you can do it. We have not raised $1 in outside funds so far. We definitely eventually will. We will have to eventually, but it is possible to build a successful smaller brand, investing in it yourself, as well as just making smart partnerships and really trying to plan ahead. And don't try to grow too fast in a way that doesn't make sense for you either, especially in this particular economy, in this particular moment in cannabis. Right. Every retail door is not even a retail door I want to be in, because it's not going to be a retail door that's going to pay me. So as a brand,
that's the important one.
Those partnerships,
that's exactly, because I, as a distributor, I have a lot of meetings with brands, and the first thing that they tell me is, I want to get into the sweet flowers, or I want to get into the catalysts of the worlds and the stizzies of the worlds. And 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 I tell these guys all the time, like, although those accounts sound sexy and they sound great, and yes, like they're big names, but as a small brand, one, can you supply all 5 shops? That's one.
That's one.
2, more than likely they're gonna want to place you on terms, right?
Yep.
So you're not gonna get paid when you make the delivery. You're gonna have to wait. Can you produce another batch of products
while you're waiting
to get paid? Like, that's the second thing to consider and think about. And so, yes, these things.
And the third thing to consider and think about is the fact that not anybody specifically, but I will say larger retailers, right? Retailers with more power, they're going to want you to sell to them, at a lower wholesale price as well. And so, oftentimes you might think, I want to get here, I want to get there, I want to get there. The requirement for you getting there might be something that your margins can't even handle. I've been offered to be on all kinds of menus and lots of different opportunities. And when I do the math, I'm kind of like, I'm giving you my product. Right. You're going to sell it and make money, but I'm not, right. But it's exposure and it's this and it's that. Well, I don't need exposure right now. I need to sell weed. That's what we all need to do. We need to sell weed and margins that make sense. And the underrepresented brands looking for exposure is not the place where you're going to sit there and want to be, so sometimes it makes sense. Selling your flower or selling your products a little cheaper, get into those doors. But at the end of the day, you're going to have to do some serious understanding of the reality of the market. And, when I hear people say, yeah, I'm in 250 stores, I just think to myself, I know for a fact right now, if I were in 250 stores, I would be on the phone calling 150 of them on a daily basis, being like, when are you going to pay me? Please, are you going to pay me?
Yes.
Question mark, are you going to pay me?
Yes. Absolutely.
And sometimes the answer is going to be no. Right. And I think a lot of what people don't realize is that the difference between an MSO brand or a certain, massive brands, they can handle many retailers not paying them. They can write that off. It's not a big deal. But that happening to a brand like mine, that can shutter my brand.
Absolutely.
I'm owed $200,000 and it's not going to get paid to me. What are we talking about?
Right.
I just think that we have to be really aware of what we're getting ourselves into. And the getting onto a retailer shelf is not about space on that shelf. It's about a partnership in them, helping you sell your product and you helping them sell your product and their other products in their store. You both have to be good partners, but it's a partnership and not really just space that you're going to inhabit. Because if you're just inhabiting space, you're not going to be successful there anyway.
Absolutely. And just to be clear, I'm not knocking on the sweet flowers, the catalyst of the world. But just, again, like Timeka mentioned, and like you just said, is be mindful as a brand where you are as a business and make those decisions to be prosperous. And then when the time is right, then you can get to those brands. So
people don't realize being on Ease, man, that's feeding 14 depots on a weekly to bi-weekly cadence. Do you have the production capacity? Do you have the distro ability? Do you have the inventory? And how long will you? Because if you're only going to have it for a moment, is it even worth, all the rigmarole?
Got it. So what shops can we find Biko, and how can we support you? Where else can we find Biko? Shout out your tags, shout out your websites.
Well, I will say, I will take this opportunity to say, I did just take a trip to New York, and we are, Biko has definitely been talking to a lot of amazing partners recently, looking for different ways to expand the brand. Lots of kind of friends offering amazing help and partnerships. And that's really going to be the way that we're going to be able to survive and thrive, is kind of like with a little help from our friends and our family across the country. And so I will say that, and I do want to give a shout out to the ladies of Nova's Ark, who were just fantastic. This weekend hosted me, and I got to see kind of their amazing farm in the Hamptons, which is just awesome. And, you know, you can find out a little bit more about what we have going on, where you can find us. You can find us online at bicoflower.com. You can find us on Instagram at bicoflower as well. We've got some new content coming out on the Instagram, so you'll be able to check out some of the beautiful shoots we've been doing. And you can hit me up as well. I am Timeka Drew. You can always hit me up in my DMs, ask me questions. If you had any questions about LA social equity, I am also an Oaksterdam coach. And so I am your girl to hit up and get all of the information and the deets on LA social equity. I'm always happy to help.
And it sounds like we're going to have a part 2.
We can have a full workshop if you want. We can take questions. We can have stuff ready. Like, I am so happy to help in any way I can, especially in our LA social equity community, but in the social equity community, in the underrepresented community across the country. I've just been really focused and passionate to make sure that we stick together and that we can build some things that can really, make sure that we can all survive and thrive in this moment.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all the work you do. Like, I really appreciate it. It shows how passionate you are, as I touched on. And, for everyone that's listening, make sure to support Bico. Make sure to find out all the retailers that they're at and go ahead and pick some up.
Sweet Flower is one of them. We were talking about Sweet Flower earlier. Go to Sweet Flower. Check us out.
There you go. Sweet Flower is one of them. My shout out, I got to give my little shout outs to my girls. Dalia, Rosie, Faith. I love you girls. That's my special shout outs in every episode. I always love to give a little shout out to my daughters.
Oh, that's so sweet. Isn't it amazing we can actually build cannabis businesses now that we can hand down to our kids? Like, to me, that is just one of the most exciting things about this industry right now, to think that like my daughter could be, running Bico one day. Like, it's just like, it's a beauty brand. Like, I built a L'Oreal and I'm just going to hand it over. That's just so incredibly inspiring to me, that we're at a time where that's possible.
It is. And, and my daughters, I have a 13-year-old, and she'll talk to me a lot about what is it like in the warehouse. And there's times where I'm like, I wish I could bring you in. Yeah.
And people talk about that a lot.
It's like, it's unfortunate that I can't right now. But, time will get there, and I'm sure things will change as we progress in this industry and allow them to come in, because just like any other business, I would love to have like the kids running around in the offices and just being present. My girls are around with me when I'm like maybe fielding phone calls and speaking with reps or talking numbers, and so just at least giving them that type of like business exposure to them. And although like right now they're just like, oh, dad's in a meeting, but I know down the line it's gonna help them, and they'll look back like, oh yeah, my dad was doing this, and it'll just
absolutely.
For them.
We don't realize how much we rub off on our kids. We were at vacation recently, and my 5-year-old was playing a game where she was pretending like she was a real estate executive. So I was like,
yeah,
that's just funny, because she will hear me talking on the phone about like real estate and this and that, and it's just amazing what they pick up from us, and then how it translates into their world.
You're right. My daughter did the same thing. She was like, Dad, I'm in a meeting right now, so please just can you keep it down? And I just looked at her like, what? My 3-year-old. She's a little 3-year-old. She's like, I'm in a meeting right now, Dad. And I was like, okay. Let me know when you're done.
Respect. Yeah.
You know when you're done, babe. And I'll come and play with you later.
That's so cute. So adorable.
But yeah, so again, thank you guys for tuning in to our episode of Said Connects. If you haven't hit that subscribe button again, CED Connects on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram at CED_Connects for all the live updates. Follow Timeka, follow Bico. And with that, guys, we're out. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.